You're listening to Systemic Error Podcast. The failure was designed.
Margaret has been forced to admit this Trump truth dot and it's spitting mad, based on an article by Tara Dublin. Trump's losses are not the story, the protection is. The court said no, the party did not. The source centers a real development to the Supreme Court knocked back Trump's birthright citizenship ban. Jean Carroll's lawyers moved to collect the money he owes her, and Trump kept dragging out the rest of his legal exposure. That is the context. The political meaning is simpler, and uglier institutions can still stop him in isolated moments. But the Republican Party still exists to absorb the blast and keep him upright. Power is sitting in plain sight. The article gets one thing exactly right. The relevant power is not MAGA online tantrum. It is the institutional coalition that keeps Trump from paying a full price for what courts have already found. The Supreme Court matters because it can block him. Jean Carroll matters because she forced a record of accountability through the courts. But the Republican Party still owns the larger machinery of permission, from Congress to the legal teams that buy time to the movement, that turns every ruling into grievance theater. That is the core structure. Trump does not survive because people are confused about him. He survives because powerful Republicans have decided that preserving their coalition matters more than making him answer for what he has done. Misdirection is the product. The source notes Margaret screaming about leftists while avoiding the obvious. That is not random hypocrisy. It is the movement's operating system. When the facts are too corrosive, the blame gets pushed downward and outward to liberals, judges, women who testify, trans people, journalists, anyone more vulnerable than the man at the center. That is why the millennia distraction matters. It is not serious politics. It is emotional labor for a hate movement that needs constant targets because it cannot survive sustained contact with Trump's actual record. The noise is the point. The noise keeps the base from dwelling on adjudicated sexual abuse, felony conviction, or the Epstein shadow. The source keeps circling. Accountability only happens when forced. Jean Carroll is the clearest corrective in the whole story. She did what institutions usually refuse to do with men like Trump. She held him in court. And she won. Then the judge had to clarify what the verdict meant in plain English, because Trump's defenders were pretending not to understand language itself. That detail matters. The legal system did not spontaneously become brave. It only became legible because Carroll kept forcing it to stay legible. The source is right to treat her case as a political event, not just a private dispute. She exposed how much of Trumpism depends on everybody else being asked to lower their standards of truth. The party of complicity. The Republican Party is not an audience watching a scandal unfold. It is part of the scandal. The source's central accusation here is that GOP officials keep backing Trump even after the courts, the jury, and the record have piled up against him. That is the real institutional story. What looks like loyalty is actually a bargain protection for Trump in exchange for access to his base, his power, and the permission structure he built. The longer they stay loyal, the more they normalize the premise that criminality is not disqualifying if it is politically useful. That is not confusion. That is collapse dressed up as strategy. What this story actually shows. The source wants the reader to see Trump losing. The larger truth is worse. Trump is still being enabled by the institutions that should have isolated him, and every delay, deflection, and procedural dodge tells the same story. American political elites are often willing to tolerate open degradation as long as it serves their side. That is the pattern. Not one bad man, but a party and a media ecosystem that keep laundering his damage into spectacle, while courts and individual accusers are left to do the democratic work that parties are too cowardly or too compromised to do themselves. You've been listening to Systemic Error. Thanks to Roar's story for today's article. With the automated voice of Kristen, thanks for listening.